I loved him. I trusted her. And together, they destroyed me. Ethan, my perfect husband, my supposed hero, fed me nothing but lies. Helen, my best friend, my sister in everything but blood, smiled in my face while stealing my world behind my back. And like a fool, I believed them. Until the day I saw the truth. Until the day I learned that the man I adored was the same man who shattered me. And the woman I called my sister was laughing behind my back. But here's the thing about betrayal. It sharpens you. It turns love into steel, trust into a weapon. They think they won, that I'm too broken to fight back. They have no idea what's coming. Ethan still thinks I adore him. Helen still thinks I don't see the knife she's holding. Good. Let them believe it. Let them bask in their victory. Because when I strike, they won't just lose. They'll beg. Hey you. Welcome to AUDIOBOOks, where love and logic are officially divorced, and chaos has full custody. Chaos begins. They called it a gilded cage, my life. And, in all honesty, they weren't wrong. Ivy Rivers, the name had a ring to it, didn't it? A name that opened doors, commanded attention. A name that came with an endless supply of pretty dresses, expensive jewels, and invitations to the most glamorous parties. I was the sole heiress to the Rivers import empire, a title that whispered of power and privilege. I was a face that graced magazine covers, a darling of the city's elite, and, for all intents and purposes, a woman who seemingly had it all. But, you know, all that glitters isn't gold, and I was quickly learning that behind the shiny facade, my life was just a carefully constructed prison, and I was a prisoner of my own illusions. I had everything money could buy, everything except that one thing I had always longed for, that one thing that money simply could not buy, a genuine connection. A love that wasn't based on wealth, power, and social status. A love that would see beyond the name, beyond the money, beyond all the pretty things that surrounded my life. I was yearning for a love that was real, a connection that made my heart soar and my spirit sing. I thought I was so naive that I thought I had found it in Ethan. Oh, Ethan. Ethan Sterling, the eldest son of the Sterling conglomerate. He was charming, ambitious, and undeniably handsome, a man who seemed to effortlessly capture the attention of everyone in the room. And he certainly captured mine. He had a way about him, a sort of charismatic allure that seemed to make me feel special, like I was the only woman in the room. He had all the characteristics of a man that I thought I could spend my life with. He was smooth, confident. He had that aura of a prince that made me think he was my knight. Our paths crossed at one of those extravagant charity galas, a lavish affair filled with carefully curated smiles and calculated handshakes, where everyone was trying to outshine everyone else, and where everyone was pretending to be someone that they were not. Ethan was at the center of it all, the all-attention seeker, basking in the spotlight, and when he saw me, something changed. He stopped, he looked at me, he came to me, he made me feel like he had been searching for me his whole life, that all the attention that he had did not matter anymore, because I was there. And oh, I fell for that hook, line, and sinker. Our love story, if you could even call it that, was born from what I believed was a miracle, a twist of fate that I now understand was nothing but a cruel joke. An accident that nearly claimed my life. A burning car, twisted metal, and a desperate struggle for survival. I remember being trapped, the heat of the flames licking at my skin, the smoke choking my lungs, the fear that my life was coming to an end. And then, I remembered a figure, a dark silhouette emerging from the chaos. A hero. When I woke up, 2 months later, in that sterile hospital room, my body broken and my mind still clouded by the trauma, Ethan was there, at my side. His eyes were filled with an emotion that I mistook for love, a concern that seemed to melt my heart. He told me about that night, how he had been there, how he had been the one to save me from the flames, how he had stayed by my side all those months, praying for me to wake up, promising me that we would be together forever. I was vulnerable, I was confused, and I believed him every single word. It was so easy to believe him back then. It was so easy to fall for all his lies. I had just been saved by this man, a man that I now had a deep debt to pay. I remember feeling this overwhelming gratitude, this sense that I had been given a second chance, and that I was now bound to him, for life. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was repaying the debt that I thought I owed him for saving my life. I thought that this life was a chance to pay him back. What a fool I was. What I didn't know back then was that my savior was not Ethan, but his younger uncle, Dante. A man of few words, with eyes that held a depth of emotion that I had never encountered before. Dante had been the one to pull me from that burning car, he had been the one who had put his life on the line to save me, and, in doing so, he had lost his ability to walk. He had been crushed under the weight of that car, but in all the chaos that night, his family had decided to hide him, to send him away, to make him disappear. They had erased him, like he was nothing but a stain in their history, a mark that they could not remove. His sacrifice, his love for me, had been dismissed by the selfish actions of Ethan and his mother, who, fueled by greed and a thirst for power, had orchestrated this entire deception. They had ordered Ethan to claim the act as his own, and for him to marry me, so that they could have access to my family's wealth, so that they could steal what was not theirs to take. And he, being the greedy man he was, had been more than happy to do so. He was happy to have the praise, the power, the glory, the wealth. And so, driven by this misguided sense of gratitude, fueled by an infatuation with a lie, I agreed to marry Ethan. Our wedding was a lavish affair, a spectacle of wealth and influence, the kind that would make any girl's heart flutter. It was perfect, according to those around me. Everything was perfect. But, for me, it was nothing more than the construction of another prison, a cage made of lies and deceit that I had willingly walked into, believing I was doing the right thing. I was so eager to pay my debt that I did not see all the signs. I remember, before walking to the altar, looking at my reflection in the mirror, and I had this feeling that something was off. That something was terribly wrong. That this was not right. But I had pushed those thoughts aside. I had convinced myself that it was just wedding jitters, that I was just being nervous. I told myself that I was finally paying my debt, that I was making the right choice, that my life was finally on the right track. Oh, how wrong I was. Marriage was supposed to be a promise. A sacred bond between two people who loved each other. At least, that's what I had always been told. But what do you do when the person who promised you forever starts changing before your eyes? What do you do when the very foundation of your love starts to crumble? I wasn't prepared for the truth about Ethan. I wasn't prepared for the man he would become. The first year of our marriage was blissful, or at least that's what I chose to believe. Ethan was still the man I had married, or so I thought. He was charming, attentive, and affectionate. He continued to be the man who had saved my life, and I continued to love him deeply. I thought that no matter what happened, nothing could tear us apart. But I didn't see the cracks at first. They were subtle, hidden beneath layers of charm and sweet promises. It wasn't until after the honeymoon phase had faded that I began to see the truth. Ethan changed. Slowly, but unmistakably, he changed. At first, it was small things. Comments about my appearance, critiques disguised as concern. "You've put on a bit of weight, Ivy. Are you sure you're eating enough vegetables?" Or, "You should wear something more modest. People are talking." It seemed harmless at first, maybe even caring, but the constant barrage of criticism started to chip away at my self-esteem. Then, he started accusing me of things I hadn't done. "A late night at work? I'm sure you're not seeing someone else, are you? A quiet evening at home, alone with my thoughts? I think you're spending too much time on your own these days. Don't you think it's a little odd?" Ethan would find faults in everything I did. Nothing was ever enough. And the accusations, subtle but hurtful, came without reason. No matter how hard I tried to please him, it was never good enough. And yet, he would turn it all around, pretending to be the loving husband once more, sweeping me off my feet with empty promises of change. But the truth was clear. He was changing. I just didn't want to see it. The man I had married, the one who had once held me close, promising he would always protect me, was slowly slipping away. The late nights, the constant work trips, the disappearances, all of it started to weigh heavily on me. It felt like I was losing him, but I wasn't sure how or why. I began questioning everything I thought I knew about him. Was it just the pressure of our marriage, the responsibility? Or was it something else? The worst part was the isolation. Ethan began manipulating me, urging me to stay away from my family. "They're not good for you, Ivy," he'd say. "They don't understand us. They only want you to be like them." It was subtle at first, but it became clearer over time. He wanted to control me, to keep me away from the people who had always loved me. He wanted me to be solely his. I remember the first time he told me to cancel a family gathering. "You're always with them. You need to spend more time with your husband, Ivy. Don't you think you owe it to us?" His tone was calm, but I felt the pressure mounting. The guilt. The manipulation. And so, I stayed home. I started spending more time with Ethan, trying to please him, to make up for the distance between us. But with every passing day, I felt myself becoming more and more trapped. Like I was losing my identity, my sense of self. Helen was always there for me. Or so I thought. She was my best friend. The one person I trusted above all else. I had known her since childhood. We had laughed, cried, and shared everything. Or so I thought. I never saw it coming. How could I have? I never imagined the one person I thought would protect me would be the one to betray me. Helen was my confidant, my support system. She was there for every moment of my life, or so I believed. We had been inseparable, always sharing our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. She was the first person I turned to when Ethan started to change. You're overthinking it, Ivy. You know how men are. They get distracted. But he loves you. You're his world. Those were her words to me when I first confided in her about my growing concerns. She would always calm me down, make me feel like everything would be fine. She was my rock, my best friend. Or at least, that's what I thought. What I didn't know then was that Helen wasn't just my best friend. She had always envied me. My life. My family. My future. Helen wasn't just a friend. She was a liar. Helen had always been jealous of me, of everything I had. The love I received. The opportunities. The wealth. She pretended to be happy for me, but deep down, I know she wanted my life. She wanted everything I had. It was during this time that I began noticing her subtle advances toward Ethan. I tried to brush it off at first. She was my friend. She wouldn't do that to me. But as the days went on, it became impossible to ignore. The way she lingered around him at family events, the way she would touch his arm, the way she looked at him. And then, one day, I found the proof. It was a video. A video clip that would change everything. I remember the moment like it was burned into my memory. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on the reports in front of me, when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a message from a colleague, but instead, it was from an unknown number. The message read, "You deserve to know the truth, Ivy." And there it was. Videos of Ethan, in bed with Helen. They were laughing, their bodies intertwined in a way I had never seen before. I felt my world crumble. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had believed, shattered in that instant. My hands shook as I stared at the image, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The betrayal. The heartache. I couldn't breathe. Helen had been lying to me this whole time. She wasn't my friend. She was my enemy. She had been plotting to take everything from me. And Ethan? Ethan had betrayed me in the worst way possible. He was the man I had married, the one I thought would love and protect me. And yet, here he was, in the arms of the one person I had trusted most. I thought I had already hit rock bottom. I thought the betrayal from Ethan and Helen was enough. But nothing prepared me for what came next. This was more than a betrayal. It was an attack. A deliberate, calculated attempt to break me. The house that had once felt like a home, filled with warmth and love, now felt like a prison. Every corner, every room, reminded me of the lies, the deceit, and the crushing weight of my marriage to Ethan. The man who had once promised to love and cherish me was now the very one who tore me apart, piece by piece. It was a quiet evening, one of those rare moments when Ethan wasn't out late with his work, or perhaps with Helen, my so-called best friend. But tonight was different. I felt it. A stillness in the air, a heaviness that clung to the walls like the silence before a storm. I was in the living room, sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames as they danced. It was supposed to be a comforting sight, but all I saw were the memories of the promises Ethan had made, now nothing more than burnt remnants. I had just stood up to refill my cup of tea when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking on the polished floor. Helen. I turned, forcing a smile to my lips, but the venom in her eyes told me all I needed to know. The mask she had worn for so long, her pretense of friendship, was slipping. It wasn't about me anymore. It had never been about me. It was always about her. "Ethan is waiting for you," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I felt my stomach churn. She knew Ethan was in the study, and it wasn't to see me. No, he was waiting for her, the woman he had been betraying me with for months. "I'll go in a minute," I replied, forcing a calmness that I didn't feel. But Helen wasn't done. She took a step closer, and I could see the sneer tugging at the corner of her lips. "You know, Ivy," she began, her voice like poison seeping into my skin. "You should really thank me. If I hadn't been there for Ethan, where would he be?" She chuckled, a cold, cruel sound. "He never wanted you. He was always just humoring you. But I'm the one who understands him. I'm the one who gives him what he needs." I felt the sting of her words like a slap. I wanted to retort, to stand up for myself, but the weight of everything, the betrayal, the isolation, the despair, made me stay silent. But that silence was my mistake. Before I could take a step back, Helen lunged forward, her hands pushing me hard in the chest. I stumbled back, my feet losing balance, and in that moment, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. I saw the staircase behind me, the gleaming steps leading down to the marble floor below. The moment I lost my footing, I knew what was coming. There was a sickening thud as my back hit the steps, followed by the excruciating pain of my body slamming against the cold floor below. "Ivy!" I heard Ethan's voice shout, but I couldn't respond. The pain was blinding. My head was spinning, my body aching as I tried to push myself up. I slowly lifted my hand, hoping for some sign of help, some sign that Ethan still cared, that he was still the man I had married. But my fingers barely reached the air before I felt the cold embrace of the marble floor against my back. My vision blurred, each breath came harder than the last, my body aching, and my heart shattered into pieces I wasn't sure I could ever collect again. I could feel the wetness between my legs, the cold, heavy sensation that hit me like a freight train. The realization swept over me like a tidal wave. No, I couldn't even put into words the devastation I felt. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just betrayed. I had lost our child. Ethan and I's baby, the one thing I thought could bring us closer, the one thing I thought would unite us in a way nothing else ever had. That tiny heartbeat, that fragile hope, was gone. I tried to call out, tried to scream, but all that escaped me was a breathless gasp, and even that was weak. A single tear fell from my eye as I saw Ethan standing beside me, but instead of offering me comfort, his face was filled with panic, not over me, but over the woman who had pushed me. He didn't even seem to register that I was bleeding, that I was slipping away from him. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice hoarse and full of confusion. But his gaze wasn't on me. His eyes, the ones I had trusted with everything, were locked on Helen. His hand reached out for her, and I could see the concern in his eyes, the frantic look in his movements. "Helen, what happened? What's going on?" His words barely registered in my mind, the pain drowning everything else. I don't know, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She just fell. She was so upset about everything. Maybe she just collapsed. You know how emotional she can get." I wanted to scream at her, to tell him the truth. But the words were stuck in my throat, my body too weak to fight anymore. The irony of it all, Helen, the woman who had been pretending to be my friend, had just caused this. And Ethan, the man who I had thought was my partner in everything, was still defending her. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. I had been alone for so long without even realizing it. Ethan wasn't the man I had thought he was. He wasn't my hero. And Helen? She wasn't my friend. She had been scheming against me all along, playing a role, wearing a mask of friendship while planning my downfall. They were both responsible. And they were both breaking me. The hospital room was sterile, cold, and quiet. I had been unconscious for what felt like days, but when I opened my eyes again, the only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't the same woman anymore. I was broken, inside and out. I had lost the child I had carried, and with it, I had lost so much of myself. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around me, and I struggled to breathe, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. The man I had thought was my husband, my partner in everything, was absent. There were no reassuring words, no gentle caresses, no tenderness. There was only silence. And the unmistakable ache in my chest. The pain of the miscarriage was profound, but the emotional devastation was even worse. How could he not be here? How could he not come to me, to apologize, to at least acknowledge the pain I was in? I had just lost our child. My body, already broken, felt like it couldn't bear the weight of my heart's agony. The pain of the miscarriage was profound, but the emotional devastation was even worse. How could he not be here? How could he not come to me, to apologize, to at least acknowledge the pain I was in? I had just lost our child. My body, already broken, felt like it couldn't bear the weight of my heart's agony. But there was someone who cared. Someone who was always there for me, even when I didn't realize it. My grandfather. He came every day, sitting by my bedside, holding my hand in silence. His presence was comforting, a small reminder that not everyone had betrayed me. He didn't ask for explanations, didn't demand answers from me. He just held me, let me cry, and spoke only when necessary. His presence alone was a balm to my wounded soul. But it did. I felt broken. Unworthy. As if the pieces of me would never fit back together. Ethan had abandoned me in the most vulnerable moment of my life. And Helen? She had taken everything from me. And she wasn't even sorry. It wasn't just the physical wounds that ran deep. It was the emotional scars, the way I had been betrayed by the two people I had trusted the most. Ethan and Helen had taken from me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces, alone. The air in the hospital was stifling, heavy with a mix of antiseptics and emotions I could no longer bear. Every breath seemed to carry the weight of my pain, both physical and emotional. When the discharge papers were signed, and the nurse gently wheeled me to my grandfather's waiting car, I felt a flicker of relief, even as exhaustion settled deep in my bones. The bright sunlight outside was jarring after the sterile confines of the hospital, but it was also a small reminder that life went on, even when mine felt like it had been brought to a screeching halt. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the hospital building, its imposing facade shrinking in the distance. A part of me felt lighter leaving that place, but another part ached with the knowledge of what I was leaving behind. A child I would never hold, dreams that would never materialize. I fought the tears threatening to spill, refusing to break in front of my grandfather, who was seated beside me, his hands resting protectively over mine. The ride to the Rivers mansion was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the engine. My grandfather, always a man of few words, occasionally glanced at me with a mixture of worry and quiet determination. He didn't press me to talk, didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he let the silence wrap around us, a comforting cocoon that allowed me to gather my scattered thoughts. When the car finally stopped in front of the Rivers mansion, I hesitated. The grand estate, with its sprawling gardens and imposing architecture, loomed before me like a relic of another life. The Rivers mansion wasn't the sanctuary it once was. Walking through its grand doors felt like stepping into a museum of my past mistakes. Every polished surface, every ornate piece of furniture seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life I had so naively built with Ethan Sterling. The walls bore silent witness to the love I had misplaced, the trust one had squandered, and the pieces of myself I thought I'd never recover. The memories of laughter and shared moments with Ethan felt like ghosts haunting the halls. But the silence was louder than any memory. It was a deafening reminder that Ethan had never once reached out. No calls. No messages. Not even a single inquiry about my well-being after the accident. Each passing day in the hospital, I had foolishly clung to the hope that Ethan would call, that he would show some semblance of concern for the woman he had once vowed to love. But the silence was as sharp as a blade. It cut through any remaining illusions I had about the man I thought I knew. Even now, as I crossed the threshold of the mansion, I couldn't help but glance at my phone, as if a part of me still expected something, anything, from him. But the screen remained dark, a testament to his indifference. I paused in the grand foyer, my hand brushing against the banister of the sweeping staircase. This was the same place where I had once imagined a future filled with love, laughter, and children. Now, it felt cold and hollow, a house stripped of its warmth. But something was different now. The Ivy who walked through those doors wasn't the same woman who had been blindly in love with Ethan Sterling. I was battered and bruised, but I was also alive, and I owed it to myself, and to the memory of the child I'd lost, to rise again. I wouldn't crumble under the weight of betrayal and loss. No, I would rebuild. I would find strength in the ruins of my shattered life. If Ethan's silence had taught me anything, it was that I couldn't rely on anyone else to save me. Ivy, my grandfather's voice broke through my thoughts, steady and grounding. You don't have to do this alone. I turned to him, the lines of his face etched with concern and resolve. I know, Grandpa, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. But I need to start somewhere. And so, I began the long climb up the staircase, each step a reminder of the journey ahead. I would pick up the pieces of my life, not for Ethan, not for anyone else, but for myself. For weeks, I stayed under the watchful eye of my grandfather. His presence was a constant source of comfort, a lifeline tethering me to reality as I struggled to rebuild the broken pieces of my life. He refused to let me sink back into despair, and for that, I was grateful. Each morning, he would insist that I join him for breakfast in the sunlit dining room, a ritual that soon became my anchor. The dining room, with its high ceilings and ornate chandeliers, had always been a space for family gatherings and warmth. Now, it served as a quiet refuge, where my grandfather's steady voice filled the silence I once feared. He spoke of life, business, and his memories of my parents, their resilience, their love, and their strength in the face of adversity. It was during one of those mornings, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows and cast a golden glow on the room, that he brought up Dante Sterling. Ivy, Grandpa began, his tone thoughtful as he placed his coffee cup down. His gaze held mine, steady but soft, as if he had been deliberating this moment for some time. There's someone you should reconnect with. Someone who has always had your best interests at heart. I looked up from my tea, curiosity and a touch of hesitation flickering in my eyes. "Who?" "Dante Sterling," he said simply, leaning back in his chair with an air of conviction. "He's built himself into a force to be reckoned with. He's not the same boy you knew, but I think you'll find comfort in his company. He's been through his share of storms, just like you." The name hit me like a wave. Dante Sterling. I hadn't heard that name in years, but the memories came flooding back, vivid and bittersweet. Dante had been more than a childhood friend. He had been my rock, my confidant, and the quiet protector who always seemed to know what I needed, even when I didn't. I could almost hear his laughter, the way it used to echo in the halls of our family estate during summer visits. I remembered his quiet support, the way he'd sit with me under the oak tree in the garden, listening as I poured out my dreams and fears. And then life had torn us apart, his exile, my growing obsession with Ethan, and the years that had passed without a word. "Dante," I murmured, almost to myself. Grandpa nodded, his expression tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "He's been through his own battles, Ivy. After everything the Sterling family put him through, he built himself up from nothing. Pandora Group, that's his empire now. He's a man who understands loss, struggle, and rebuilding. I think you'll find solace in him." I hesitated, the thought of reconnecting with Dante both exciting and daunting. What would he think of me now? Would he see me as the broken woman who had fallen for Ethan's lies? Or would he remember the girl I used to be? Grandpa seemed to sense my uncertainty. He reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "You don't have to do this alone, Ivy. Sometimes, the people we've left behind are the ones who can help us move forward." His words lingered with me long after breakfast, echoing in my mind as I wandered the halls of the mansion. Dante Sterling. The name was a lifeline, a thread connecting me to a part of my past that felt untouched by the chaos of my present. That evening, I found myself standing by the window of my bedroom, staring out at the sprawling gardens below. The soft glow of the moon bathed the landscape in silver, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. Perhaps Grandpa was right. Perhaps reaching out to Dante was the first step toward reclaiming my strength. The next morning, Grandpa wasted no time. "I've already made the arrangements," he said over breakfast, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Dante's in town for business. I've asked him to visit. He'll be here tomorrow." My heart raced at the thought. Grandpa, I don't even know what to say to him. It's been years. "Start with hello," he said simply, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The following day, I found myself pacing the grand living room, my nerves fraying with each passing minute. I had dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress that felt like a balance between the woman I was and the woman I wanted to become. When the door finally opened and Dante stepped in, the air seemed to shift. He was taller than I remembered, his presence commanding yet warm. His suit was impeccably tailored, but it was his eyes that struck me, still kind, still filled with that quiet strength I had always admired. "Ivy," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Dante," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just stood there, the years of silence between us melting away as we took each other in. And then, without thinking, I stepped forward and hugged him. The embrace was brief but grounding, a reminder of the bond we once shared. As we sat down to talk, the conversation flowed naturally, as if no time had passed. He told me about his journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the creation of Pandora Group. I listened, captivated by the resilience and determination that had shaped him into the man he was today. And when I finally opened up about my own pain, the betrayal, the loss, and the weight of rebuilding, he listened without judgment, his presence a balm to my wounded spirit. "Ivy," he said after a long pause, his gaze steady, "you don't have to face this alone. Whatever you need, I'm here." For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Dante by my side, I could see the beginnings of a future, not just one of survival, but of strength and healing. In the days that followed, Dante and I kept in touch. At first, it was through polite texts, updates about our lives, checking in on how the other was doing. But slowly, those conversations grew deeper, more personal. He asked about my days, encouraging me to take small steps toward rediscovering myself. He never pried, never pushed, but he was always there, a steady presence when I needed it most. One afternoon, Dante invited me to visit Pandora Group's headquarters. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to step into his world, a world so different from the one I was trying to leave behind. But his gentle encouragement won me over. The building was as impressive as its reputation, a sleek tower of glass and steel that reflected the city skyline. Inside, it was a hive of activity, filled with professionals who greeted Dante with respect and admiration. He gave me a tour himself, his voice filled with pride as he spoke about the company he had built. "This is incredible, Dante," I said as we stood in his corner office, the city stretching out before us through floor-to-ceiling windows. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, leaning against his desk. "But every challenge taught me something. And now, it feels like all of it was leading me here, to this moment." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps my own pain and struggles were leading me somewhere, too. With Dante's support, I began to pick up the pieces of my life. I returned to the Rivers mansion, determined to reclaim it not as a monument to my past but as a foundation for my future. I reopened my office at Rivers Pharmaceutical, diving into the work I had once been so passionate about. Dante's encouragement extended beyond words. He offered insights from his own business experience, helping me navigate the challenges I faced in my company. He became a mentor, a confidant, and a source of unwavering support. But it wasn't just about business. Dante reminded me of who I was before Ethan, before Helen, before the betrayal that had nearly broken me. He encouraged me to rediscover the things I loved: painting, gardening, even simple walks in the park. Revenge wasn't something I sought lightly, but it became a necessity. Ethan and Helen had stolen so much from me: my dignity, my trust, my child. They had to face the consequences of their actions, not just for me but for the countless others they might hurt in the future. With Dante's vast resources and my grandfather's unwavering support, we began a strategic takedown of Ethan's life. Dante's investigative team dove deep into the operations of Sterling Entertainment Group, and what they uncovered was far worse than I had imagined. Ethan's empire, once shining with prestige, was riddled with corruption. The team found evidence of tax evasion, embezzlement, and questionable dealings with unsavory organizations. Dante ensured the findings were airtight before presenting them to the authorities and leaking them to the media. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Ethan. His name, once synonymous with glamour and power, became a cautionary tale of greed and deceit. Headlines painted him as a criminal, his face plastered on every news outlet, and Sterling Entertainment stocks plummeted. While Ethan's professional life was crumbling, I focused on severing the last tie that bound us, our marriage. Filing for divorce was both empowering and terrifying. It was the final step in reclaiming my life, but I knew Ethan wouldn't let go easily. At first, he ignored the divorce papers, acting as if they didn't exist. Then came the late-night calls, the messages dripping with feigned remorse, the half-hearted attempts to lure me back. When none of it worked, he resorted to anger, calling me ungrateful, claiming I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me. And when even that failed, he turned to cruelty. The mockery. One day, I arrived at a legal meeting only to find Helen seated beside him, her perfectly manicured nails tracing patterns on his wrist as they whispered to each other. The smugness on her face made my stomach turn, but I refused to let them see how much their presence disgusted me. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up," Helen drawled, a smirk playing on her lips. She turned to Ethan, feigning pity. "You know, it's sad, really. She used to be so full of life, but now? Well, I guess losing a baby does that to a woman." My blood ran cold. Ethan let out a chuckle, shaking his head as if my suffering was a joke. "Don't be so harsh, sweetheart. It's not her fault she wasn't strong enough to keep our child." I felt a sharp sting in my chest, but I refused to let them break me, not again. Taking a slow, deep breath, I met their laughter with an icy smile. "You're right, Ethan," I said calmly, tilting my head. "I did lose something precious, but not the way you think." I leaned forward, my voice like a blade slicing through the air. "I lost the illusion that you were ever a man worth loving." Helen's smirk faltered, and Ethan's jaw tightened. "Good." I sat back, crossing my legs as I continued. "You should enjoy your little victory while you can. After all, the only thing worse than losing a child is losing everything you thought made you powerful. And trust me, Ethan, that's coming for you." Despite my composure, Ethan fought the divorce at every turn. He delayed proceedings, refusing to sign documents, demanding settlements that made no sense. He even had the audacity to claim that I owed him for the years we spent together. "Come on, Ivy," he smirked during one of our last meetings. "We both know you'll come crawling back eventually. Without me, you're just another forgotten heiress with nothing to her name." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "You really don't get it, do you?" Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "Enlighten me." I met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I don't need you. You need me. You needed my name to climb the social ladder, my family's influence to open doors, and my love to disguise the fact that deep down, you were always a pathetic, second-rate man grasping at power. His smug expression cracked, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The final nail in the coffin came when the judge ruled in my favor. With the evidence of his infidelity, financial corruption, and emotional abuse stacked against him, Ethan had no choice but to concede. When the gavel struck, finalizing our divorce, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. As I stepped out of the courtroom, I heard Ethan's voice behind me. You think you've won? He spat, his face twisted in rage. You think walking away makes you powerful? You're nothing without me, Ivy. I turned slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Meeting his furious gaze, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. You've lost, Ethan, I said softly, my words laced with finality. Not just me, but your reputation, your empire, and the respect you once commanded. I glanced at Helen, who was nervously fidgeting beside him now that his name was tarnished. Enjoy your life with her. It's all you'll have left. I walked away without looking back, leaving them both to drown in the wreckage of the life they had built on lies. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter. The legal battles didn't end with our divorce. The revelations about Sterling Entertainment's corruption opened the floodgates to lawsuits from shareholders, employees, and even government agencies. Ethan's once impenetrable empire crumbled under scrutiny, and no amount of damage control could stop the destruction. But the real spectacle? Watching Ethan and Helen turn on each other like rabid dogs. For all her smugness, Helen hadn't anticipated that the man she had schemed so hard to win would one day become her worst nightmare. It started small, missed payments, sudden budget cuts in their lavish lifestyle, Ethan's growing irritation with Helen's spending habits. But the real blow came when he discovered just how much she had drained from him. It was a stormy evening when Helen walked into the Sterling penthouse, drenched from the rain, carelessly dropping her designer bag on the counter. She kicked off her heels, only to find Ethan sitting in the dimly lit living room, a drink in hand, and a look that sent a shiver down her spine. Where have you been? Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Helen rolled her eyes, pulling off her wet coat. Out. Why do you care? Ethan exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers against the whiskey glass. I got a call today. From the bank. Helen stiffened. And? He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. They wanted to know why $500,000 was funneled out of my account into an offshore betting site over the past 6 months. The air in the room shifted. Helen forced a laugh. That's ridiculous. Why would I? Don't. Ethan's voice cut through her excuse like a knife. He reached for a stack of documents on the table and tossed them toward her. Bank statements. Transaction records. Screenshots of her reckless gambling habits, all neatly compiled by his legal team. Helen's smirk faltered. Ethan, baby, I can explain. Explain. He shot up from the couch, towering over her. You stole from me. His voice shook with barely restrained rage. You bled me dry while I was fighting for my company. Helen's jaw clenched. Oh, please, Ethan. Don't act like you're some innocent victim. Your company was already rotting before I ever touched a dime. Ethan's fist slammed against the wall, his patience snapping. You think this is funny? You think you can just waltz in here and mock me while I'm drowning because of you? Helen crossed her arms. Oh, I'm mocking you. She let out a bitter laugh. Tell me, Ethan, where was this anger when you let Ivy bleed? When you sat back and watched me push her down those stairs? Silence. For the first time, Ethan had no retort. Helen stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. You let her break while you stood beside me, holding my hand like a fool. Now look at you. A broken, pathetic excuse of a man. Just like her. Ethan's eyes darkened. Get out. Helen blinked. What? I said get out. His voice was eerily calm, the storm brewing in his gaze. By morning, I want you gone. Helen scoffed. And where exactly do you expect me to go? I own half of this. Not anymore, Ethan interrupted coldly, stepping back. It took a moment for Helen to process his words. Then her expression twisted. You wouldn't. I already have. The air left her lungs. Ethan took slow, deliberate steps toward her, his smirk finally returning. Did you think I wouldn't prepare for this? That I wouldn't cover my tracks? He let out a sharp laugh. Helen, darling, you signed a prenup. Helen's face paled. And guess what? Ethan leaned down, his voice a mocking whisper. Fraud and infidelity nullify your claims. You're not getting a cent from me. Helen staggered back. Ethan, be reasonable. Get out, Helen, before I throw you out myself. It didn't take long for the world to find out. The same socialites who had once admired Helen now whispered behind her back, laughing as she struggled to keep up appearances. Her credit cards were declined. Her once loyal friends ignored her calls. She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the reputation of a disgraced gold digger. In a last-ditch effort to claw her way back, she tried to sell off Ethan's remaining assets, luxury watches, paintings, even the engagement ring he had given her. But karma had one last trick up its sleeve. Security footage of Helen, the newly supposed Mrs. Sterling, haggling at a pawn shop went viral overnight. The world saw her for what she was. And Ethan? He was too busy drowning in lawsuits to save her. The perfect couple had finally imploded, consumed by the very greed and betrayal they had once used to destroy me. I heard the news through a mutual acquaintance, but I didn't bother to gloat. There was no need. Their downfall had been inevitable. A house of lies will always collapse in on itself. And me. I was finally free. Free to build a life of my own, beside a man who valued me. Because while they were fighting over the ruins of what they had stolen, I was standing next to Dante, the man who had always seen my worth, even when I had forgotten it myself. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And this time, no one could take it from me. While Ethan and Helen were busy reaping what they had sown, I was busy rebuilding my life. Dante stood by me through every step, his unwavering support a constant reminder of what true partnership looked like. He didn't just help me heal, he helped me thrive. With his guidance, I expanded Rivers Pharmaceutical, introducing new initiatives that focused on accessible healthcare and sustainable medicine. What started as a way to reclaim my family's legacy soon became something much bigger. Dante believed in my vision, and with Pandora Group's innovative construction solutions, we built state-of-the-art medical facilities in underserved areas. You're changing lives, Ivy, Dante said one evening as we stood in front of a newly completed hospital. Not just reclaiming your past, but shaping the future. I turned to him, the warmth in his gaze grounding me. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have, he said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. But I'm glad I get to do it with you. Those moments were constant with Dante, where love wasn't a battle, but a safe haven. Our personal relationship blossomed naturally. There was no urgency, no desperate need to prove anything to the world. Dante was patient, never rushing me but always making it clear that he saw a future with me. One evening, after a long day at work, he surprised me with a simple dinner at his penthouse. To new beginnings, he said, clinking his glass against mine. I smiled. To happiness. We talked for hours about our dreams, our fears, our past mistakes. Unlike with Ethan, I never felt like I had to shrink myself to be loved. Dante saw me, every scar, every battle, and still, he wanted me. I never stopped caring about you, Ivy, he admitted, his voice quiet but firm. Even back in college, I watched you from afar, hoping you'd notice me. And when I saw what Ethan did to you, it took everything in me not to burn his world down. My breath hitched. Dante. He exhaled. But revenge won't give you peace. Love will. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. I hadn't realized he'd reached for something in his pocket until he pulled out a small velvet box. The world around me slowed as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Ivy Rivers, will you marry me? Tears welled in my eyes, my past and future colliding in this single moment. I had spent so long thinking love had to be painful, that devotion had to be earned through suffering. But Dante showed me a different kind of love, the kind that healed, that empowered, that cherished. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Dante, I'll marry you. Question for you. What would you do if the person you loved the most betrayed you in the worst way possible? If they took everything from you, your happiness, your dignity, even your child, and left you to suffer alone? Would you stay broken? Or would you rise and make them regret ever crossing you? If you would rise, if you would fight, if you refuse to stay broken, then hit that subscribe button and stand strong with me. But if you'd rather stay in the shadows, watching life pass you by, don't subscribe.